So I want to discuss about this false teaching that there are multiple gospels for the purpose of being saved. Some people claim that there is a gospel for the Jews, that they're saved one way, and then there's a gospel that came later in the book of Acts that was given specifically to the Apostle Paul, which is another means of salvation outside the gospel that was given to the Jews in Acts chapter 2 per se. This idea is not substantiated in the Bible, and let's take a look at what the Bible actually says about the gospel that is for salvation. Looking at Romans chapter 1 verse 16, the text says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." We can clearly see this is the gospel. There's only one of them that is for the purpose of being saved. And it was preached to who first? It was preached to the Jews first, then to the Greeks. Let's see what the gospel entails according to Paul also in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul says in verse 1, "Now I will remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you." Again, clearly he's saying the gospel, singular, not plural, the gospel, which is what? Let's see what Paul has to say, starting in verse 3. "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures." So Paul is saying the first importance of the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the most important thing about the gospel. So I'm asking the question, did the Jews preach the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection in Acts chapter 2? Because Paul says it was first preached to the Jews. The gospel that is for salvation was preached to the Jews first. So let's take a look at the book of Acts and let's see if we find the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in Acts chapter 2. "This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men." So there's the death of Jesus. Verse 27 shows us this idea of the burial or being sent to Hades and not seeing corruption. Verse 27, the text says, "For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption." There's Jesus's burial, him going into the Hadean realm where the dead are, and also comparing with David and his burial and his tomb is still present in that day in comparison to Jesus, where he died, but he was not left in the grave or in that burial site. Let's take a look, verse 29. "Brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God has sworn with an oath to him that he would set one of his descendants on his throne, he foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption." So here we go. Jesus' death and burial and resurrection. Continuing on, verse 32. "This Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses." So that's the nail in the coffin. The Jews preached the same gospel that was for salvation in Acts chapter 2, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Therefore, what Peter preached and what Paul preached was the same gospel because they're both for salvation, which is found only in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So this idea that there are two separate gospels is false. Believe the Bible. Believe in the one gospel for salvation.